but we
Yeah.
don't do much truth telling. And I believe God wants to meet us in the truth. And it's when we get to the place where we finally can tell him the truth. I just said, stop in the middle of his prayer. Stop. You're not telling God the truth. You're not telling him what you really believe about him.
Hey there, welcome to the Inherent Identity Show. In this episode, I have an interview with Steve Petermeyer. Now, Steve is actually a personal coach of mine, as in he helped me through a number of my own struggles, and I wanted to talk with him about how he connects with God and what he sees is the barriers to really establishing that deep and conversational type of relationship. And it was interesting because before we started the episode, we did pray together to see what God wanted us to talk about. And there wasn't too much that came up for me, but for him, he said, I think we should talk about how people shouldn't be listening to podcasts. And it was really funny because, well, if you're listening to this, it's either through YouTube or a podcast, and you might consume a lot of information. So this kind of insight is definitely not something that I would think to say. So I think in part that that's definitely what we should talk about. So we talked about some of these things, but I just really want to emphasize the aspect of truth telling. And this is what you're going to learn. And it was really powerful for me because a lot of times the way I see truth telling to God and confession is to be able to say, God, I'm sorry that I did this. I admit that these are the struggles that I'm having, but that's not truth telling. And Steve's going to tell us what truth telling is through this conversation. And I really think it's going to be powerful, or at least it was powerful for me and it was powerful for my clients that I shared with in the Inherent Identity family. So if you're interested in that, you can go to inherentidentity.com for further information. But let's dive into this interview with Steve, and he's going to jump right in. This is a kind of a conversation, so it's just going to dive right into his thoughts on how we shouldn't even be listening to podcasts. So here we go.
It isn't about another podcast. It's really about our encounter with Jesus. I'm just seeing it around a lot. And my wife does. I come home and she's cooking dinner.
Yeah.
She has longer hair on the side, so I can't see. And I try to talk to her and she goes, and it's like, so I'm kind of on a thing of, I don't want to listen to another podcast. I want to leave my mind and heart and ears open to hearing from the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
And podcasts can be great, but people, I think, can get drunk on podcasts.
Yeah.
And the answer is another podcast. They're going to get the right insight, the right knowledge from another podcast. And it's like, it's the way the enemy tries to deceive it. So now I'm going to get you addicted to podcasts.
Yeah.
And you can't put that much stuff into practice. And so then it becomes hearing stuff that we never apply to our life, because it takes longer than that to apply it to your life.
Yeah. Well, I think for myself, I still deal with this in some regard, but I do love learning. Like, I do enjoy it, but there are times where I feel like I can just get overloaded. And there is a difference in just this endless seeking.
Yeah.
This endless seeking for an answer. And what does that communicate?
Yeah.
What does that really say about me? And as I think about it, I think it's just a sign that I think that there's an answer out there that I can't find in here.
Yeah.
And like, what do you see in that?
I just see the whole concept of we can't handle living in the unknown.
Yeah.
So we want to know. And so if I just know more, then I'm okay. But God's always calling us into the unknown.
Right.
Always calling us out of the familiar and the comfortable and the safe. Always out to, I don't know what to do with this. Yes, okay, so now come to me, let's talk about it. That brings us that intimacy that I think ultimately we all want. But to get there, you have to let go of your ideas
Yeah.
and your knowing. We want to know what's next in our lives. We want to know what God's doing. We're just this desire to have it figured out. I think it's the desire that led to the apple from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
To know, to have the answers, to have the knowledge, to have all the right, and it's still in us. So if we just listen to enough podcasts or read enough books, or we can do the same with His Word. When Jesus says, "You search the Scriptures because in them you think you'll find eternal life, but you're unwilling to come to me." There's a lot of that in us.
I just met with a woman this morning, and she was kind of at that point of desperation. She's studied the Bible all her life, and yet the kind of God that she experiences is the kind of God that is similar to her father, which was hurtful and demeaning. And as much as she might even study the word, it wasn't leading her to experiencing the truth of God. If you could just tell all the people that are listening to all the podcasts, including this one, what would you invite them to do? Like, how would you invite them to engage in the experience of Christ in their daily life?
It all begins with, in my opinion, and I have to do this, I just did this morning, telling the truth and being honest with yourself about what you truly believe about yourself and about God. Because He meets us in truth.
Yeah.
And so often we are living out something that's not true. We're making up something because we want it to look a certain way. And so we live out these things that aren't really true of who we are and how we really feel.
Yeah.
And so it leaves us empty, trying to fill it like somebody else did or do what somebody else did. That's where I think podcasts can do that. It's like, well, what worked for somebody else? I've got to find the magic pill from somebody. But we are unwilling to tell God the truth of how we really feel about Him. I was meeting with this guy. This guy leads men's groups and all this.
Yeah.
And he was dealing with some pornography issues, and it came up, and I said, well, let's just make sure that you've sort of confessed and laid it all down, and then we'll talk about where to go and what to do. And I said, so why don't you just pray again? I just want to hear you tell God about that.
Yeah.
And he starts right out with, oh God, I'm sorry. I wish I hadn't done that. I don't like it that I do that. And I wish it could be different, and, forgive me. And I just said, stop in the middle of his prayer. Stop. You're not telling God the truth. You're not telling Him what you really believe about Him. And he goes, well, I don't understand what you mean. And I said, well, do you believe that He loves you and cares for you and provides for you and is big enough to meet the need that you're trying to meet in another way? And being truthful with God is saying, God, I don't think you're here. I don't sense your presence. I don't think you care about this in my life. I don't think you can fill these spots. And so I have to go elsewhere to get it met. And I think I'm all alone and I'm stuck and it's all on me. And he goes, oh, it's like, we don't know how to truth tell. So how do you get honest and connect with God? If He meets us in truth, we have to learn to find what we really believe.
Yeah.
Because so much of it is just, we've lived this sort of rote. We do these things. I read my Bible. I pray my prayers to God. And it's really just ritual. It's this idea of we just do these things and then we're okay. It's like, I'm going to go through my things. I'm going to pray my prayers, which generally are leaving God voice messages and not expecting to hear back, not an encounter, but I've done the thing and then I can move on and live my life, right? I did that in the morning and I live my life. rather than it being when something happens to stop and go, what do I really believe
here? Yeah.
What I really believe about God and what I really believe about me, those are huge. Yeah. So otherwise we're just living by ritual and moral code. That's the other one I was trying to remember.
Yeah.
And there's no life in it. And so then we wonder why we can't get over these things that we know are wrong. Well, we're just going through the motions, and there's no power in that, because the power is in the encounter. The power is in the connection that happens. If you don't have that, then it's just going through the motions.
So in your experience with the fellow,
Yeah.
once you kind of shared more of what truth telling looks like, what happened then?
Then we prayed. He prayed, and he prayed truthfully what he believed. Then I believe God is there waiting, and then we finally are willing to be truthful. And I think God just goes, finally, I've been waiting for you to just get to that place. Okay, now we can work with this.
Yeah.
Right? It was the difference, with the Pharisees. It was always just placating God and doing what we thought he wanted, and there was no truthfulness to it. It wasn't genuine. It wasn't authentic, what we really feel in our spirit. And oftentimes it's because we don't really know. We don't stop to think about, what do I really believe? Well, I just did that and it wasn't honoring to God. So what do I believe? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about God that led me to that? Then once you're in truth, then just continue to meet him in truth. And it's a process of learning to, we're so used to making things up for our parents and making things up for our spouses even, or whoever. Making it sound good, it's not authentic.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Spain report?
No. What's that?
SPANE. It's on about positive and negative emotion. They did this study where they wired you all up to see what had the most impact in terms of emotion. And we would think it would be love, because, love has to be the highest emotion.
Yeah.
In terms of its impact. But it wasn't. 4 times greater than love was authenticity. And when we are authentic, the power that has in our own lives and in other people's lives, you think about it, confession, all of speaking truthfully with God has to do with being authentic, being willing to be authentic and lay it down, regardless of what people think of you or what God thinks of you or whatever, to be that truthful, that it comes from this place of authenticity. It's huge.
And I think that people experience the rush of trying to learn, trying to figure life out, trying to fix these problems, when in reality, this solution is in just admitting to the Lord what you think he lacks or what you think is wrong with you that is stopping you from getting the answer from him.
What we do with these thoughts and how we learn to listen to God in the midst of understanding what's going on in our brain, all that, it's huge. I've recently been reading a lot of Jim Wilder. He calls himself a neurotheologian. I just think what we can learn from that is important as well.
Yeah. As you're talking, I reflected on the life of Christ, and like Christ didn't have the podcasts. He didn't have, what he had was he had God in his ear the whole time.
Yeah.
And he lived a life that wasn't pressured by anyone outside of him. It's not like he was seeking for any kind of framework or solution to whatever was going on. It was just a matter of him living out as who he really is.
Yeah. Well, the only thing he did that we can see sort of pattern, be with the Father and do what he says. I mean,
yeah, that's it. Yeah,
pretty straightforward. So that's huge, right? That
Yeah.
should be huge for us. That's our
Yeah.
example. So that's where I think the learning can get in the way sometimes.
In my mind, I'm trying to think, okay, what's the sign or how could I help people discern the difference? And for me, as I think about it, it's like if I notice that when I'm listening to something, if you're listening to a podcast and if you just ask yourself, why am I listening to this? Or why am I studying this? There's a question that Jamie introduced me to is what am I doing that the Lord didn't invite me into? What am I learning that the Lord didn't invite me to learn about?
Yeah.
Because I don't need to learn about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the part. It's always, what does it need to look like now? So,
Yeah.
so God, what do I need to know about that? And
Mm.
what if every time we had a decision to make that it became something we just did and asking, what do I need to know about that? Is there anything more I need to know before I step into this? Anything else
Yeah.
I like to do that. In fact, I was speaking at a retreat this last weekend to missionaries, and it was a missionary conference. And before I go into it, I go, okay, God, what am I bringing?
Yeah.
Which part of my identity am I bringing to this group? And what do I need to know about that? And he said, you are going to be beacon of hope. That's one of my identities.
Yeah.
I want you to bring hope to these people. And there's going to be one person. My main identity is father to the fatherless. There's going to be one
Mm.
guy there that you are going to be father to the fatherless for him. And it was so fun because I
Yeah.
went into the time going, okay, so where is he?
Yeah.
And I mean, the first night I walked, there were 150 people in this room. And I walked in and it was like there was a light on him.
Wow. Yeah.
And amazing stuff happened during the weekend. And it was just so much the Lord. And we're now meeting once a week and I'm coaching him. And it was a remarkable story how it all happened. And it's just so fun.
Yeah.
Right. And just asking that, okay, what do I need to know here?
Yeah.
All the time, what's the next book? If there's going to be one. I'm in a place right now where I'm not listening to any podcasts
Yeah.
because it's like I'm full up. And I want more time to germinate, to
Yeah.
let ideas and thoughts go around my head and meet God in those versus more information coming in.
Yeah.
And so I think we need times like that. And God knows best what we need. And so if we would just ask more often, what do I
Yeah.
need to know about that? Or what do you want me to see in this? Or what do you want me to hear? What is my place here? I'm going to meet with someone after this. And on the way, I'm just going to pray, okay, God, what do I need to know about where he is today?
Right.
And what am I bringing today? And any insight that I need to have, show me what that is. And give the opportunity. Now, there might not hear anything. That's okay. We've
Right.
given God the opportunity to enter in and say something if he wants to.
Now, just a quick question on that. If you don't hear anything, like, what do you do anything or what do you take that as?
I didn't need to hear anything in that moment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You
Because
just keep
sometimes
moving
I'll ask
forward.
a question like in my time in the morning, just being alone with God, and I hear nothing. And then I'm in the shower and boom, it all starts coming.
Yeah.
So that's okay. Well, however he wants to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
Because we can get so rote in our ideas of how this all works. And
Yes.
it tends to become, it isn't relationship anymore. It's like expectation of this is how I do it, and he's going to be here, and this is how he has to do it. And it's like, no, God's way beyond that. In fact, there's a great line in the book Metanoia. Have you read that book?
Uh-uh.
Great book by Alan Hirsch and Rob Kelly. And in the book, it's beautiful because it talks about how Jesus embodied metanoia, and he defines metanoia as a new way to think about things.
Yeah.
And Jesus embodied it, right? And,
Yeah.
Matthew 5, you heard it said this, but I tell you this over and over and over again, right?
Right.
And we want to get set in things because they're familiar that way and comfortable and easy and safe and all that stuff. And God's always taking us out of that. So one of the lines in it, my favorite line is that we think of our last experience with God as it, but that actually becomes a block to the next experience with God because we hold on to it. And while God is wanting to take us to the next encounter with him, that's going to take us deeper, that's going to, right? And so the biggest block to our next experience with God is our last one.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so if we can stay in that place of curiosity and mystery and discovery, that's where God's always taking us.
Yeah. Kind of like this surprise of, I'm going to go into this and I don't know how he's going to show up, but it's going to be great.
Yeah.
I think that would be maybe a more beautiful kind of expectation, is that the Lord will show up for me, but it's not going to be the way that I might think.
Well, and I heard there's an African pastor that was in town, and we had this session with him. It's just like 8 of us, and he was talking about how we expect things from God, and then we get disappointed.
Yeah,
he didn't do it the way we thought he ought to do it, and he said, and so our attitude towards God is you're holding things back from him.
right.
Right? Like, why don't you just tell me? And, rich young ruler, what do I need to do to have eternal life? He just wanted the formula, right? Anyway, and so he told the story of Easter egg hunt. And he goes, when you do Easter egg hunts, the little kids, you put the egg right outside the door.
Yeah.
They get so excited, right? But your 20-year-old, and my kids, we actually still do Easter egg hunts sometimes, and they're in their 30s because they love them. Well, what do I do then? I hide them. I take hours hiding the eggs so that they won't find it, right? And then they go out and they love it.
Yeah.
Because when they discover it, it's so exciting.
Yeah.
And that's how God wants us to live life, in that sense of discovery, searching and exploring and discovering with him. That we're made for that. And if we just gave it to us, we'd go, what? That's you're just going to give it to me? And that's
boring.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's providing this life of adventure and discovery and all of that. And he's not hiding it from us. He's hiding it for us.
Yeah.
And then we get to discover it with him. And that's, what those times are like in your life where you come to this new discovery. It's amazing.
That's more life-giving.
Yes.
You were talking about how you just seek the Lord out in the decisions of your life every single day. And it wasn't but maybe 5 days ago, I went to this conference and there was kind of a networking dinner and this little independent film that we'd watch afterwards. And I was just sitting there, and I don't go to too many conferences but I sat there kind of looking around. I don't know anybody. And so I was like, Lord, what do you want me to connect with here? I glance over to my left, and there's this older gentleman that walks up, and Lord's just like, that guy. And so I watched where he went, got my meal, and ended up sitting by him and his wife, and come to find out that he's connected to this organization that just does a lot of faith work. And he looked at my podcast. He's like, we might want you to be on our podcast, and they have a decent distribution, and I was just like, oh, how cool that I could get connected with this guy, and the potential of just sharing this message, even if it leads nowhere. The fact that that was the encounter and that was the person that he pointed out, I just thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's living that adventure and going into it going, okay, what do you have?
Yeah.
And
What's
I'm open.
next?
Yeah, what's the next thing? It doesn't mean that it leads to anything in particular, because we don't
Right.
know what's behind the scenes of all the things that could happen. But it's learning to hear his voice and respond and say yes.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the goal. And oftentimes that's all we know. And we don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, and I do want to highlight that as a principle, and this is something that I talk about in the book that I'm writing, is that it's so easy, and say in my example, to be able to say, oh, the Lord's providing this way, it's going to end up in me being a guest on their podcast. It's gonna, like, our brain just automatically goes to success. Magic will happen from all these things. When it could just be, oh, well, maybe you're just supposed to touch one person, or maybe it was just a little nod to, hey, I've got you. That's all it was.
Yeah.
And so to just let go of the detachment, recognize when your brain wants to create this whole story of the future of how this should pan out, of how you think it could pan out, even. Because if it doesn't work out that way, then I think that's when we get frustrated and we think that God has done something against us, you know?
Yeah. And that's, he's done something for us, because it's in, look at the scriptures and look at Jesus' life.
Mm,
It's suffering and death before resurrection.
yeah.
And you have to go through those times of suffering in our life. And the reason that has to happen is we're not going to let go of things, die to them, until we suffer enough. Because if it's going well, we're going to stick with what we got. We just stay in what we're doing until it doesn't work anymore. And we call
Yeah.
that suffering. But that's the only way for God to lead us out of it, because otherwise we hold on tight. And it's in when it doesn't work anymore and you have to go, oh, then God can get our attention and lead us into a new way. And that's leading us from suffering to let go of it. Okay, now I can be open to new things, and God can lead us in a whole new way.
Yeah.
But it's through pain and suffering. It's the only way we get there.
Yeah. Has there been anything, whether or not you worked with someone or whether in your own life, where you've experienced a long time of suffering?
Well, I can say in my own life,
Yeah.
I went through a time, and it was through tragic circumstances. We lost our house. Our house burned down 12 years ago
Mm,
now.
yeah.
We lost everything. And it was difficult because we gave our house to the Lord. It was,
Mhm.
when we built it, we put verses on the wall and the whole thing, and we used it for ministry in our community all the time.
Wow.
And it's like, why did our house burn down? There are people that don't even love you. Okay, so first of all, I don't think God makes it happen.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was very difficult, because you go through this. What did we do? How could this be happening to us? What's going on
Yeah.
here? But what's so amazing is how God redeems things like that.
Yeah.
Once we endure through it, remembering what is true, again, we go back to truth, because even in those situations, okay, your house burns down, but what is the truth about God and his love for you? Well, he's still with us. He hasn't abandoned us. And then I'm a big believer in, uh, I have this line, and actually I learned it in a dream from God. And I don't have lots of dreams where God says stuff.
Yeah.
And I won't go through the details of it, but what came out of it was, God is always in the unexpected. And so for us in our life, and I've believed that for quite a few years. So when things happen, I'm just looking for God in it.
Yeah.
And it's so good, because when something happens that's unexpected, we usually immediately go to negative, right? So this happened to me this week. I went outside, I got in my truck, I'm driving down my driveway, and I have this rock that kind of sticks out a little bit. And I know it's there. I don't know what I was thinking, but I went and I hit it. It tore the side of my tire, and I made it to the
Oh.
bottom of the driveway, thankfully, and parked it, because I knew what had happened. I knew what was going on, and it had
Oh.
sliced the whole side, and it's just, right? And my first reaction is,
Yeah.
and then it's like, wait a minute, God, you're always in the unexpected somehow.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to look for you.
Yeah.
And so I found myself thinking about that, when the tow truck driver came and when I go to the tire place to, get it fixed. And I'm just trying to see the Lord. And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. That's
Yeah.
not important. But
Yeah.
it's the attitude of, rather than going to the negative, because that's where the enemy wants to take us to immediately,
Right.
going, wait a minute, God can use this too. So God, where are you at in this? I'm going to look for you in this.
Mm-hmm.
And so when our house burned down, that was a big thing for me, was, God, I think you're in this, not in it happening, but you're going to be with us in how we deal with this. And it was powerful in our lives. And
Yeah.
my wife and I both now look back on it and go, it was one of the best things that ever happened to us,
Yeah.
because the things God showed us and taught us. And I mean, it was a huge event in our life. I think what happens is we tend to look at everything negative,
Yes.
and I think that that's not truth, first of all. So
Yeah.
we have to go to truth first. Okay, so when something's happening, okay, God, what do you say in your word about this?
Yeah.
Where are the case studies for people going through something like what I'm going through? Because you can always find them in there, right? It's
Yeah.
incredible. And then, okay, what is your truth in this for me? Asking him and listening for that. So that we take these moments, instead of letting the enemy take them from us and really taking all the power out of them for us. Instead, in our circumstances, in our situation, going, God, you will be with me in this. So what do I need to know that I don't know about this? Right? That famous question that Jamie Dunn always used.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did that when our house burned down. I still had to mow the lawn. Right. And I'd mow, this thing is, there was still some structure left, but it was,
Yeah.
we had to take it all the way out. And I'm mowing the lawn, and God just stopped me one day and he said, I go, is there more that I need to know about this? And he said, it's going to be better than it was before. I just started weeping and I held on to that. And now looking back on it, it's 12 years ago. Oh my gosh. I mean, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but I'd hope it for everyone, right? Because of what comes out of it when we allow God to show us and speak to us in the midst of it. So I would say to the person who is feeling like there's no hope, they're going through whatever, that's not the truth, first of all. So go to the source of truth to read in the scriptures, and then go to God to go, what do I need to know about this? And he'll speak.
Yeah. He'll reveal something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been my way of dealing with when it's hard, because we're all going to have these things in our life. And thankfully we have them, because without those times of pain and suffering, we would be intolerable to live, because of what it does to us, how it takes us to the core, takes us to the real stuff. What do I really believe?
Yeah.
About life, about myself, about God, all this pain and suffering takes us to those places. And and God will redeem these things in such a way that it builds us up, and we have more to give to others, and it's beautiful what comes out of it.
Yeah. I think you had mentioned before, just when everything's going well or easy, not only is there not much work required, but our brain's very comfortable at staying in the familiar. And that familiar place, it's less growth
Absolutely.
inducing. It just doesn't provide the sense of exponential growth that I think is possible when there's suffering, and when you're really seeking for answers and seeking for connection.
Yeah, and we see the examples all over the place, and the one that comes to my mind is working out.
Oh, sure.
Right? So you have to tear down the muscle,
Right. Yep. Yep.
before you can reform it.
Yeah.
And God knows that he needs to tear down these things we believe that aren't true
Yeah.
so that he can reform our minds, right?
Yeah.
See, Romans 12, the renewing of our mind, that's the
Yeah. Yeah.
process. And in order to have our minds renewed, we have to let go of old beliefs. Well, how do we
Yeah.
let go of them? When we have to, when we're we're forced to because they don't work anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the pain. That's the pain of something. That's all it is.
So what would you encourage someone that's out of hope? What would
Yeah.
you say to
Well,
them?
I think I'd go back to something we talked about earlier, and that is
Yeah.
it has to start with truth telling.
Yeah.
And we aren't very good at that. Like we
Yeah.
complain and
Yeah.
and
We're good at that.
especially when you're in those places, we complain a lot, but we
Yeah.
don't do much truth telling. And I believe God wants to meet us in the truth. And
Mhm.
it's when we get to the place where we finally can tell him the truth. I really don't think you care about me. And, that's hard to say, especially if you've been raised in sort of religious circles. But we have to be willing to tell him the truth.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
complaining isn't telling him the truth.
Yeah.
It's just woe is me.
Yeah.
But actually coming to a place of, okay, God, I'm going to start telling you the truth. And you start doing that on a regular basis. Like in that moment, I wake up. The other day, I had a bad morning, and I woke up and I'm just going, God, I don't feel like you're here right now.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm all alone, and I feel kind of stuck, and I feel like it's all on me.
Yeah.
So would you just remind me what the truth is?
Yeah.
And I need you to be near. And he just came, and and in my imagination, I'm seeing
Yeah.
God, seeing Jesus walk into the room, and he sits down with me and he hugs me.
Yeah.
And I just let him hug me and remind me of the truth. He said, you are enough for me. We will do this together. Let's go together. We can do this.
Yeah.
And it was like, it's what I need.
That's
But it
beautiful.
begins with me telling the truth.
Yeah.
And most of our stuff isn't truth. It's just we feel sorry for ourselves and bemoan everything. And that's just all selfish.
Right. Um, if someone wanted to connect with you, where could I send them
Well,
to?
email is the best.
Okay.
Just Steve Pete Coach at Gmail.
Okay. I'll make sure to put that in the description so
Yeah.
that if people
Yeah.
want to connect with you, they can just
Sure.
copy and paste there. Um, last note, and for someone that may struggle with telling the truth or understanding how to do that, is there anything that you would encourage them to do so that they could just do this step of really admitting what they really believe?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Um, what immediately comes to my mind is Psalms,
Hmm.
and especially go to the Psalms where David is complaining, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think the other thing is asking God to give you a true picture, for
Hmm.
Him to give you a true picture of how much He loves you.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
there's something about knowing you are so loved that, okay, I can just say it. And I think that comes from the Lord. And beyond that, I think, certainly counseling and stuff, believers can help you
Yeah.
with telling God the truth. And sometimes you need somebody else to tell it too. So that, hey, I'm wanting to learn how to tell the truth. How have you done that? And what does that look like? And asking other people and getting helps with doing it. Because part of it, we don't think about how you do that because we
Yeah.
don't tell the truth very often.
Yeah.
When you think about it, we're always
No.
trying to appease people and trying to make them feel okay. And we don't speak truth very much. But thank you for that question because I'm going to
Yeah.
noodle on that a bit.
Well, I mean, because in the example that you gave earlier on, it was the guy obviously wasn't speaking the truth. So, like we just give platitudes, we give I'm sorries, and it's just I think if there is a roteness to it, then you can feel it. Like you can feel that there's a roteness, and then you can also feel when there's an authenticity here. That it's like, Lord, I feel like you just haven't shown up for me in trying to solve this problem. I don't think you care about me. I think that if you can get to a place where you feel something and it feels like it's the truth, then that's
Yeah.
probably a good sign.
Yeah.
That's a good start. But I want to
Yeah.
noodle on this question too.
Yeah. And realizing that God isn't offended,
Yeah.
he's unoffendable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, Steve, I'm excited to just connect with you further and
yeah.
what we can do down the road, just really help people understand how can we engage in this stuff in a deeper way. So thanks you for taking the time. And guys, stop listening to podcasts if that's what's needed right now. Even mine, like
No,
I admit,
do what he tells me to do.
just do what he tells you. Listen to the Lord. Yeah, that's a better thing. Well, appreciate meeting with you and we'll talk to you later, okay?
All right. Sounds good.
Hey there, thanks for listening to this episode. And I want you to keep me accountable to connecting with Steve because I think that there is definitely more that he has to share, and I want to be able to facilitate that experience for all of you. So if you want to reach out to me at tyson@inherentidentity.com, then you can keep in touch with me. And if you haven't visited the website, inherentidentity.com, then definitely go there. There are resources and other things that I want to just give you and help you work through, just so that we can go on this journey together of connecting with Christ at a deeper level, at dissolving all the fears and the shame and everything that stops us from really living into the best version of ourselves and really living into our inherent identity. So if that's you, if you're interested in all of that stuff, just go there and we will talk to you later. See ya.